All right, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about topic 2.2, the Mongol Empire and the making of the modern world. So, one of the major glow ups in the last 15 to 20 years in the world of history is the empire of the Mongols, who for 800 years were kind of seen as the bad guys of history for their brutal conquests across Eurasia. But when this book was published, Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford, historians started to rethink the impact of the Mongols and look at maybe some of the good things that they introduced. So, the Mongol Empire really kind of begins in 1206. So, in 1206, that's when Genghis Khan, otherwise known as Chinggis Khan, right, and Genghis both are correct. He is able to unite the nomadic tribes or groups of the Mongols through a process known as a Kurultai, right? And there are various spellings for this, but it's essentially a voting process. He's able to kind of build the support to unite the Mongols. He's able to build a vision to unite them on a quest for greatness, right? And in this dark color, we can kind of see what he himself in 21 years is able to achieve. That's the part that he is able to achieve just himself through the conquest. And he's able to then grow a legacy and a dynasty and what will eventually become the biggest land-based empire to ever happen under his successors and the rest of his family. So what does College Board want you to know about the Mongols? So first, what they want you to know is that following the collapse, or sometimes like they even caused the collapse of major Eurasian empires, the Mongol Empire was able to grow. Okay, well, so what does that mean? Which empires actually collapsed? Well, the major empires that collapsed include the Abbasid Caliphate. So in 1258, Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu is able to put the Abbasid Caliphate out of its misery. And in 1258, what happens is the siege of Baghdad. So it's often called one of the bloodiest days in history. And we can see some images of the sack of Baghdad here. So when a city is sacked, it's basically destroyed. So like the conquering army comes in and wrecks the place. And we can see some images of that here. So what was the capital city of the Abbasids is kind of put out of its misery. Then in 1279, another one of Genghis Khan's grandsons, this time Kublai Khan, he is able to conquer the Sung dynasty. So he comes in from the north, and over the course of several years, they take over the whole Sung empire, and they become the Yuan dynasty. So they name themselves a Chinese name. They kind of assimilate into some of Chinese culture in order to make themselves acceptable. But so those are the major empires that collapse, right? So that's most of Asia, and they're able to bring it under their control. So how did they manage to do this? Well, the Mongols used creative and often really brutal tactics to expand. So first off, one of the things that made them different is they're nomads, right? So what they're really good at is riding on horseback, using archery. And a lot of the other empires weren't trained to fight with the same speed and the same precision that they were. They would do things like feign retreat, like pretend that they were retreating to draw the enemy out and then attack them. They would do other things like this is called a Fabian tactic, right? Where you kind of draw the enemy out again into a weak position and then attack them. Genghis Khan, he reorganizes and restructures the army, and we can see here how he's able to do that, right? He organizes them in groups of 10 in order to make sure that there's a structure and an organization to it. But like I said, it is definitely a brutal conquest. So here, this guy, a Persian chronicler named Juvayni, he ends up being this is kind of awkward to me, he ends up being a governor for the Mongols after they destroy a city of his people. So here we can see the city in Nishapur. They pile the heads up of everyone that they kill, and it's like really massive. Like not even the cats and dogs should be left alive. Like, wow, sounds brutal. And so this scares people. And we can see here that the King of Hungary, right? So all the way in Europe, the King of Hungary, he's writing a letter to the Pope to be like, oh my gosh, please save us. And we can see the way that he phrases this, right? Like what he says, right? The Mongols have again unified their forces and will send countless troops against all of Europe, right? Their ferocity in battle, unless we're able to unite and fight against them, right? So this is it's striking what's going on. But once they build this empire, however brutally, one of the next things that the College Board wants you to know is that the Mongol Empire, because it does, right, I mean, like it stretches from China and Korea all the way to Europe. Because of this, they facilitate, right? They enable trade and communication to grow. So, and we can see here from this historian, Timothy May, he says it's widely accepted that the rise of the Mongol Empire greatly expanded trade and the circulation of goods. Since the fall of the Uyghur Empire, Mongolia was a region removed from their main trade routes. Thus, the Mongols erupted, so like erupted, but erupted into the wider world as a relatively unknown society. They dominated Eurasia. Envoys, merchants, and travelers came to the court of the Mongols and participated in the exchange of goods, ideas, technology, and people. Right? How could they not? Look how big that is. It's all the major trade routes across the Silk Roads. That's going to happen. And they want to portray themselves this way, right? Trade is very important to them. It's how the Mongol Empire makes money. So we can see here in this Chinese scroll painting from about 1280 that Kublai Khan, the guy who conquers China, that he's portrayed himself here like out hunting. He's down here. But in the back, we can see a camel caravan. So he wants people to know that it matters to him that trade is still happening and still supported. Another way that they do that, right, and again, they're also kind of continuing the traditions, particularly in China, because China is playing such a big role. Here we can see that they are making paper money written in both Mongol and Chinese script. So they're continuing to support trade in the same way that the Chinese dynasties did. And lastly, what the College Board wants you to know is that because, right, again, it spans across most of Asia, that increased contact between empires because of the Mongols encouraged significant technological and cultural transfers. So, right, the Mongols, they're nomadic warriors. What they're really good at is being nomadic warriors and conquering places. What they're not really good at is running an empire. So they need people who have been in these more sedentary, so kind of stable, sedentary, I think it's an A. It is. These sedentary empires like Persia, like the Abbasid Caliphate, like China, who have training on how to be civic officials and how to run an empire and a bureaucracy. They need them, and so they move them around. So they'll move Persian bureaucrats, people who are really good at tax collecting and records keeping and all of those things. They'll move them to China. They disrupt the civil service exams in China because they're like, no, you're good. I don't care where you're from. I don't care whatever. You're going to China now. They move Chinese officials around, and they also really support the arts. They support the arts. They support the culture, and so we can kind of see that happening here. Right? So in this illustration, it shows astronomers employed by the Mongol Ilkhans of Persia. So that's what the Mongols come to call themselves when they conquer Persia and the Middle East. But they're making calculations, they're charting their observations, and they're using astronomical instruments. And it's included in a world history manuscript produced for the Mongol court, right? So they may not be good at history or arts and culture and running an empire, but it's important to them, and they support it by doing things like encouraging different scientists and astronomers and scholars to keep on doing their work, and Islamic concepts like algebra and other astronomical observations will spread from the Middle East to Europe. One of the other major technological transfers that takes place is the spread of gunpowder. So gunpowder, as we know, it is invented in China, but it's not really used as a projectile weapon like in guns, the way we would think of gunpowder being used today. But it really spreads along the same route as the Mongols and makes its way to Europe, where in Europe it will be used the way that we think of it today. It will be used to fire projectiles from weapons like guns. So the Mongols, like I said, right, they have been rewritten in history as we have re-examined them. And this idea of writing and rewriting history based on either new interpretations or new documents. It is called historiography, right? The writing of history. And I think that the Mongols are a really great place to introduce the idea that history isn't static, that the past can be reinterpreted and reinvented, and that there are different ways to view it and different groups of historians who interpret events a certain way. And not everyone is like willing to accept that the Mongols are worthy of reevaluation. But a lot more people are, and it says a lot about us and what we're going through and what we're living through and what the world is like now in terms of how we see the past.